Welcome back. And again, I want to thank you all for your support. I really genuinely appreciate that I have people who want to hear me talk about Discworld and books I've read a lot. Today we're going to look at the last two official Witches books before they head into the young adult Tiffany Aching stories. So the last two Witches books are Maskerade and Carpe Jugulum. They were both published in the mid to late 90s. I think they're among the strongest Witches books because they're so very character driven. The witches aren't plopped into a framework and just allowed to play. Their own characters drive the way this story goes. Their personalities very much determine what happens next. So Maskerade picks up with, and it really has two separate plot lines. One plot line is the Maskerade plot line, and this is the plot line that is stolen very blatantly from the Phantom of the Opera in all of the ways. And I'm talking Phantom of the Opera, the musical, as opposed to Phantom of the Opera, the classic piece of literature. If you are a fan of musical theatre, if you are a fan of theatre in general, if you have an appreciation for acting and performance of any kind, this will be something you enjoy. The other plot line follows Granny Weatherwax and Nanny Og, because Nanny has written a book. Not just any book. She has written the Discworld's The Joy of Cooking, with suitable Nanny Og flair. So we get a lot of risque and innuendo-filled dishes being talked about. And as an aside, Nanny Og's cookbook is now also available for sale and is quite delightful. Yes. Anyway, so these two plot lines interact because they both end up with everybody in Ankh-Morpork. The musical theatre plotline follows a young girl from the village who you did meet briefly in Lords and Ladies. She has magical talent and she was just starting to tap into it in Lords and Ladies. But the events of Lords and Ladies meant that the witches now are aware of her and she's felt them keeping an eye on her, and she decides she doesn't want to be in their whole circle. She's like, no. And so she's run away to the city basically and has discovered that what she thinks is just a really good voice is actually mind-bogglingly amazing, and is taken on by the opera house. The problem is she is an opera star of the old school, shall we say, whereas modern audiences are after somebody quite slight and petite, and the musical director is heartily offended by this because Agnes's musical talent is literally off the chart, and whereas the pretty girl that they've got there to play the lead has the talent of a mushroom. So there's a lot of, it's not fat shaming, it's almost the opposite. It's calling out fat shaming, because this is very much saying Agnes is not her weight. Agnes is talented and she's skilled and she's clever, and she's not always cheerful. She refuses to be that cheerful frat friend. You know, she's got a lovely personality. Agnes is like, I can be a bitch too, actually. And she's marvellous. So she's in Ankh-Morpork doing opera. Fabulously, I might add. Nanny has written her book. Granny has determined that the publisher owes her quite a lot of money, and that is their excuse for chasing Agnes, to make her come back to the village because without Magrat at their local coven gathering, it just doesn't work. So rather than admit that they actually need a third witch, they use this book plotline to take them into the city, and while they're there, they'll chase up Agnes and see how she's doing. As always, when Nanny travels, Grebo goes with them. As always, when Grebo is involved, he gets a sizable slice of the action, and I always enjoy when Grebo gets to play. There is, as always, a fabulous cast of supporting characters. You have the new money ownership of the theatre. It's just changed hands before Agnes comes. He was previously a cheesemonger, so he has no concept of how opera works at all. So there are several running jokes that go through regarding his management style. So that's Maskerade, a highly enjoyable romp in the city. Then we go into Carpe Jugulum. And where Maskerade was the Phantom of the Opera and musical theatre, Carpe Jugulum is vampires and Twilight. Where Twilight was the young and handsome vampire besotted with a girl who he couldn't read the mind of, Carpe Jugulum has a young and handsome vampire besotted with someone with a split personality, which makes them difficult to glamour, basically. Whenever they push one side of this personality into docility to sort of fog their mind, the other personality kind of bounces up. And yes, it's vampires. How do you end up with the witches against vampires? Well, in Lords and Ladies, Magrat and Verence got married, and Magrat has had the royal baby, because it's about that long, and they send out invitations to the christening. They send invitations to the vampires. Now, vampires can't come into your house if you haven't invited them in. If you are a king and you have invited them into your kingdom, you've pretty much just given them the keys to the kingdom. And these are not old school vampires. These are not the velvet lined caped, widow's peaked, evening clothed vampires of old. These are modern vampires with fancy waistcoats and, oh no, we don't kill people, who do things differently. It's a christening. It's a christening of a child in a kingdom that has witches in a series of books where the author likes to play with fairy tale tropes. So someone doesn't get invited, which causes a great deal of friction. We have Granny feeling her age. She's very prideful and hasn't allowed for the abilities of the witches around her. So they get to do a bit of surprising in this book, which I heartily enjoy. And we meet a young priest. The priest who would normally officiate over the christening is unavailable. He's fallen off his donkey and broken both legs. There's an in-joke there if you care to find it. And a new priest has been brought up for this christening, and he's a young priest of Mightily Oates. He is a very young priest. This is his first assignment out of the city, and the witches have put him on notice. We don't actually want any gods interfering. Thank you very much. He sees Granny very differently than anybody else does. Everybody else in the village sees Granny Weatherwax for Granny Weatherwax, who is scary and you don't offend. Mightily Oates sees a small, wizened old lady who lives alone. And she's really offended that he notices this. And that becomes a very delightful little odd couple for this, I was about to call it a movie, for this book. And we get a lot of vampire lore, we get some lovely little discussions about religion. Granny has some really quite profound things to say about religion, in that she doesn't believe in gods, she knows too many of them. Anything more I could tell you would spoil really some of the best witches storylines. So I'm not really going to say any more about Carpe Jugulum. So Carpe Jugulum, for me, is the richest witches book. It's the one that, it's the meatiest as far as character interactions go, and is the most insightful for character interactions. And this is relevant because it's Carpe Jugulum is number 22 or 23, so it's sort of just after the halfway point in the timeline of all of Discworld being put in our hands. So this is in its richest vein moment of Discworld, where the humour and the satire and the commentary are all very balanced. So this is pretty much peak Discworld for me. This is the best balance of all of those elements for me. Other people who love themes more are going to like the later books more. Other people who would prefer more laugh out loud stuff are going to like the earlier books. For me, this is the sweet spot. For me, this is where all of those flavours balance the best. Now, I am going to continue with witches, but I'll be moving into what's officially the Tiffany Aching stories. And this is because even though it has its own little sub-series, I've always felt it's simply a natural progression from the Witches series. So I'm just going to continue. So that will be The Wee Free Men and A Hatful of Sky will be the next two Discworld books that I talk about. So keep liking, keep subscribing. I think I'm going to love you and leave you. I'll see you next time.